We are extremely used to these announcements of massive attacks by the Russian Federation, which ultimately has more resources in this war. Massive attacks, yes, but this time they were extremely surprising. Some regions have ended up being attacked much more than others, and here we must especially mention the region of Odessa. But the key point of this issue isn't even the chosen region, but rather the targets within it. Some are quite surprising, since until recently Russia was focusing only on energy, or mostly on energy. But now it turns out that it has decided to cut off Ukraine's direct communication with NATO. The war is definitely escalating. And not only that, these massive attacks have been carried out with a surprising weapon. Will you stay with us? Until the end of this video, you will indeed discover what it is and what danger it poses for Ukraine, first of all, and for NATO in general terms. Of course, also. What has been happening recently throughout Ukraine? Massive attacks by Russia have shaken the whole country, but especially targets within the Odessa region. Russian forces launched a massive attack against targets in Ukraine. During this same night, multiple targets were hit in the Petrovsk region. Local groups are reporting heavy attacks against an energy facility in Kassel. There was a fire at the substation and power supply interruptions occurred. So far, these are absolutely usual targets. The media report fires and power outages also in Koyrok, in the Zaporozhye region, where a reserve of Ukrainian soldiers was also destroyed, which was planned to be moved to the Odessa front, which will be the next town in the Zaporozhye region, where the Russian Federation would end up advancing and where it would end up bringing the most direct fighting. The authorities of Vesnisiansk in the Nikolaev region also announced the destruction of an energy facility. There are interruptions in the water supply in the Kharkov region. The Sivaya mechanical and blacksmith factory was attacked where, according to reports, equipment was also being repaired. The armored equipment. Explosions are also being reported in the city of Sumy in the region, which actually has the same name. That's the general information, but when we get into the specifics, we can see that mainly here you are seeing these images. What has been attacked is the Odessa region. Well, it turns out that Russia hadn't really been targeting it much until now, when Ukraine was affected too much. Here, depending on what you prefer, either the nose or the balls, whichever you like more. It turns out that until the exact moment when Ukraine started attacking the ships of the Russian Federation in the Black Sea, the situation was more or less under control when it started to happen. That is to say, when the ships of the Russian Federation began to receive the first attacks from Ukraine. Moreover, these attacks happened more than once. And from that point on, things changed drastically and definitively for Ukraine, especially regarding the Odessa region. Therefore, what we are seeing is that these losses on the part of Ukraine, especially in this particular region, are happening more and more frequently. Are they actually due to the actions of Ukraine itself? So it's like a message that Russia is indeed sending out massively with missiles and drones. In fact, one of the targets, I would say indirect, but yes, taken down. It was the Mi-24 helicopter, which was lost in the Odessa region along with its crew. And there goes the 12th Army Aviation Brigade. The crew belonged to the brigade. And this really denotes something absolutely tragic for Ukrainian defense, especially for the country's air defense. We're here to analyze things in depth. So could we just be talking about the loss of a helicopter by Ukraine? But what does it really reveal to us? This loss of the helicopter during the massive attack by the Russian Federation is, in fact, a much more tragic event. And the thing is, the helicopter in question has been used as an air defense system or as an anti-drone system, which is, in fact, one of the usual ways Ukraine has been using its planes and helicopters lately. which of course puts them in tremendous danger, which of course greatly wears down the little air capability in terms of aviation that the country actually had. But it also shows us that Ukraine really has a serious problem with its air defense systems. In fact, on my private Telegram channel, we were talking about it today. So, those of you who want to know more about the Ukrainian conflict directly from the scene, you are more than welcome to join the group in question. They lose this helicopter while trying to protect the country's skies, and they do so because the air defense can't keep up. With all the attacks from the Russian Federation that are happening and the targets, because the helicopter was an indirect target. That is to say, Russia hardly intended to attack it directly. But while trying to repel the attack, it ended up becoming a victim of it. However, here there are other kinds of targets, infinitely more strategic. Do you have this map where two of them are specifically marked? Both are located in the Odessa region and represent a possible isolation of the western part of Odessa and almost the beginning of the isolation of the western part of Ukraine. Therefore, anything that could be related to this, that is, the Russian Federation is attacking right now. And do you have it marked there with the relevant crosses, the most important bridges in Odessa? We were talking about the Zadaka Bridge last week, in fact, but this other bridge is another one, a key route to the southwest of the Odessa region, towards Ismail, as well as towards the border with Moldova and Romania. So what is Russia cutting off from Ukraine with this attack against the Odessa region, and specifically against this bridge that is located near the town? Mayaki. I'm not sure how it's pronounced in Ukrainian. In Russian, it's Mayki, meaning beacons, like the Vigo lighthouse, you know? Well, this town is absolutely key because of the bridge that's there. And basically, it's one of the bridges that connects Ukraine and NATO. And therefore, they serve to cut off the supply to that country in the form of this Western aid, which of course doesn't just come. Russia has already begun attacking ships, including a Turkish vessel heading to the port of Odessa, as we saw recently. But in addition, now they've really stepped up with the ground attacks. Ukrainian analysts report that Russia plans to isolate the western part of the Odessa region from the rest of Ukraine and thereby block exports through the Danube. The special attention on the Odessa region began surprisingly after these attacks, I repeat, by Ukrainian unmanned boats against Russian shipping in the Black Sea. Several Ukrainian sources are reporting this. In this way, the south of Ukraine could gradually end up disconnected from the outside world in every sense. And this in itself could really represent a kind of preparations by the Russian Federation for the future offensive. Even so, and this is where we come to the surprise of these last few months. Just as we had the Oresnik before, now we have something like this. Like the ground-based Kinzhal, several Ukrainian sources are already reporting on this new weapon that is already being used to attack Ukraine. Russia attacked our country with a ground-based Kinzhal. How dangerous will this end up being for Kiev, and not just for Kiev, in fact, not just for the region, or simply for the capital? Aren't we talking about something really serious here? I mean, we're talking about a missile that has characteristics similar indeed to a Kinzhal. And compared to the usual Iskanders that are typically used, the Russian Federation has a range up to 2.5 times greater. Today, Ukrainian monitoring channels reported that the Russian armed forces during the nighttime attacks, they used for the first time a new version of the missile from the Iskander-M system, which was conventionally called Iskander 1000. 1,000 because the supposed firing range of the new missile is 1,000 kilometers, and it has a warhead of about 300 kilos, and this is also with a lighter warhead. That is about 200 kilos, more or less. It could give it a range of up to 1,300 kilometers. The old Iskander will definitely continue to be used, but this is something like the updated version. It could fly up to a distance of about 500 kilometers, but it did have a warhead of about 480 kilos. The firing range, therefore, of this new superweapon of the Russian Federation has increased by 2 to 2.5 times. This is not only what the armed forces of Ukraine will have to face, but rather it's just the beginning. And here we must especially mention the recent statements made by the Russian Federation that we discussed. In fact, in yesterday's live broadcast, we made it very clear that Russia is preparing for a much longer war. And ultimately, although it is committed to diplomacy, it understands that the war will last for a long time. And therefore, it is necessary to ensure the systemic capacity for mass production of weapons to continue achieving objectives on the battlefield, which is ultimately to wear down the Ukrainian armed forces as much as possible.